You'll know that over the last few weeks we've been covering this question of student loan repayments in some detail, something that I've been reporting on for some years as a matter of fact. And about a fortnight or so ago, we had Lord David Willetts, of course, former University Secretary, who's on the show, one of the creators of the current system, certainly the Type 2 loans, which most of the students ex-students, graduates who are repaying now are on. He was on the show a couple of weeks ago. This was him defending the policy, as I say, a couple of weeks ago now.
For over 20 years, we've had a graduate repayment scheme where the idea is that graduates, when their earnings are above a threshold, repay the cost of their education. And I stand by that as a principle. I think that, and the fact that it has survived for over 20 years, I think shows it's a widely accepted principle. The exact rates, the exact repayment thresholds, the exact terms, I always thought every 5 years there should be a proper review so that people could decide what was the right balance between the graduates paying back and the kind of taxpayers writing off the cost for the graduates who couldn't afford to pay back. And I still think that we should have a reasonable discussion about the exact repayment terms, but within the framework that we have a graduate repayment system.
Lord David Willetts there, who, as I say, one of the creators of the current system, is always thoughtful about it, written a lot over the years about the question of intergenerational injustice. Well, Nick Hillman, as a matter of fact, was special advisor to the university's minister, Lord Willetts, at the time, and one of the architects, along with him, of the current student loan system. And Nick joins me now. Nick Hillman, thanks so much for coming on the show. Caught my eye this week when it was written up that you had said that, or at least the headline was, that the student loan architect admits the system was designed in something of a mad rush. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, good morning, Lewis. Yeah, I mean, I was referring back to the period after the 2010 general election where the country felt austerity was necessary. All the political parties of the 2010 election had promised austerity after the financial crisis. And in other words, they'd promised big cuts to public spending. And of course, shifting to a greater student loans and less taxpayer funding of higher education was one part of that. And so it had to be done and dusted really by the spending review in I can't remember if it was November or December 2010. I think it was December, but the big decisions were taken sort of in about November 2010. So yeah, policy making was put together very quickly then. But as David Willett said, that doesn't mean the policy was the wrong policy. It was just a statement of fact that a new government, a first coalition for, 70 years or something, had a big job to do.
But do you think that in retrospect, as you say yourself, it was a big change and it was being done quickly, in a rush? Do you think in retrospect, the speed of that meant that perhaps the policy ended up, in some of the details, not being as good as it might have been?
Well, I was quite amused to find myself in the paper the other day described as the architect of the system. I mean, policies have multiple inputs and multiple players. And indeed, the Bible here was a report produced for us by someone called John Brown, Lord Brown, that the previous Labour government had actually set in train, but was delivered to the coalition. And no, look, most of, not all, but a lot of what people are currently complaining about to do with student loans were changes that happened after the decisions in 2010. So, for example, maintenance grants were abolished in 2016. The student loan repayment threshold freeze was announced last year. There have been other freezes too. Back in 2010, we said the repayment threshold should go up in line with earnings. We said maintenance grants should continue. So a lot of the things that people are really annoyed about now, and I get they're annoyed, no one likes having to pay back very large loans for something that used to be free. A lot of it's to do with the tweaks and people mucking around with the system that the coalition devised.
Although one thing that people complain about most of all, of course, is the question of the interest that is paid. And Nick, I have to say, I can already see people texting. Whenever we cover this story, this is the thing that perhaps people get most exercised about and cannot understand. Why is it that the government of which you were part levied any interest on student loans above inflation? You can make the argument, of course, to have inflationary link with inflation so they don't depreciate in value. But why on earth are we charging students above inflation on something that should be for their education?
For two reasons that decision was made. The first is the government itself has to borrow money to lend to students, and the government pays, the financial markets to borrow that money. So there's a real cost to government of borrowing that money. The second thing, and the Liberal Democrat half of the coalition were particularly keen on this, was to build in a very small level of redistribution within the system. So at the time, it was thought the cost of the government borrowing the money was 2.2%, but the interest was set at 3%. And you, by the way, you only face the maximum interest if you're on a salary of about £52,000 a year after study. But it was to make sure the really rich graduates paid back for a little bit longer rather than extinguishing their loan really quickly. It is an unpopular feature of the system. New Zealand got rid of the real interest rate on their loans back in 2005. You could get rid of it, but I think the frustration that those of us who are involved in setting up the system have is that first of all, the critics can't quite decide which the most unpopular feature is. And secondly, they haven't quite...
because there's so much to choose from. It's all so unpopular.
Well, look, public policy, Lewis, you've been writing about public policy and doing media on public policy for years. Public policy is a trade-off. And a decision...
and it's the young who are consistently traded off with regards to this policy versus everybody else.
Lewis, I'm a parent. I've got teenage children. I get that. And I myself was in my 40s before I could buy a house. So with a mortgage, I totally get that. But the idea that getting rid of the real interest rate on student loans tomorrow will suddenly make life much easier for young graduates is not true, because
it would have been. And every penny helps. And right now, at the moment, as you know, young graduates are really struggling.
No, but Lewis, their monthly repayments would be the same. What determines the monthly repayment is that it's 9% above a repayment threshold. What the interest rate does is it determines whether you stop paying your loan off at, 45 or 50 or 60, whatever. So actually getting rid of the interest rate tomorrow could be done. The government would still have to find money from somebody else to cover that cost, but it wouldn't make it much easier suddenly for people to buy homes or pay for childcare.
But you will understand, Nick. But you will understand. But the thing that the people, and again, I get this all of the time, graduates who are sometimes paying, reasonably substantial amounts of money every single month out of their income. They see that come out of their pay slip, and they're already being, they end up on very high marginal tax rates as a result, and a result of other government policy as well. And then they look at their student loans portal, they go in, they expect to maybe think, well, at least I'll have paid that debt down a bit. And lo and behold, it's actually gone up. And you must understand that is deeply, not only frustrating, but maddening.
Yes, no, I absolutely do understand that. I mean, I think it's a bit more complicated than you've just described.
Not that much more complicated.
Well, for example, during the very high period of inflation, when inflation was way above 10%, there was a cap on the interest rates, and the loans therefore lost value in real terms. So actually, they were going down in real terms. So it is a bit more complicated than you're saying. But look, we as a country have decided, and we could make a different decision, we have decided to have a very expensive model of higher education, where we have world-class universities. I think that's a good thing, myself. We have a model of higher education where typically people move away from home and go and study at a university away from their home. That brings a whole load of additional maintenance cost expenses. And we've decided to be a country where we send a lot of people to higher education, not least because the alternatives to higher education have not always been historic.
Nick,
those all cost money.
You said you've got kids. Do you think that you will pay off some of their loan for them, or give them money so they don't have to take out sufficiently as large a maintenance loan as other kids?
No, because actually the student loans come with all sorts of features that, first of all, they're not at university yet. I hope they go, but that's their decision. But the student loans come with all sorts of features that mortgage, credit cards, and so on and so forth do not have. So if you're in low-paid work, you don't pay.
Yeah, the government sets all the terms. And I have to repay it for 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, but I would love it if my mortgage provider gave me those terms. If I lose my job, I wouldn't have to pay the money back. After a certain amount of time, the entirety of the sum gets written off.
40 years? Great, brilliant. So your entire working life. I mean, Lewis, I don't think that's much of a plus.
Lewis, okay, but look, you're an expert on public policy. You understand trade-offs. I get you don't like the current system. There are features of the current system.
It's not a question of me liking it or not, Nick. I mean, it's just that, as you know, there are millions and millions of young people who hate it.
It is, because I watched your very one-sided newsagent podcast, whatever it is you call it.
It's a podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with the medium.
The public policy. Look, come on. Come on. You don't need to do ad hominem.
Go on.
Look, you're an expert on public policy, and public policy is about trade-offs. And so I've just explained to you why the system is so expensive. We choose to send a lot of people to higher education. We have a residential model of higher education. We have world-class universities. We could give up on any one of those.
But Nick, you're presenting. This is what I find a bit puzzling about this debate. You also, you know public policy very well, and it is a trade-off. And many of the proponents of this system set up a completely false binary, which is that we can have this system, or there's some sort of anarchic vision of student finance which can't be paid for and is unaffordable. It's about political choices, and you've already identified yourself, and I accept you weren't responsible for all of these things, but there are plenty of features of the current system. You could maintain the overall structure of the current system, but whether it is the repayment threshold, the pretty outrageous situation with maintenance grants versus loans, which just embeds structural inequality of our society, or tweaks on the interest rates that would make a significant difference to young people at the start of their working lives.
Yeah, but they all have to be paid for.
Yeah,
and
of course.
remember, people who go to university typically, not always, but typically have significantly higher salaries than people who didn't go to university, and all sorts of other benefits as well, like much less likely to be unemployed. So absolutely we could share the cost, but it's likely that the people who, a lot of the extra money would have to come from people who haven't had any of the benefits of higher education that you and I have had. So you could do that. I mean, Scotland does it. Scotland has no tuition fees. It still has big debts for maintenance, but it has no tuition fees. But if you're a Scottish person trying to find a place at a Scottish university, you'll find the places are very, very tightly controlled. And that's why lots of them have to come south of the border and roll an English university and take on the same debt. So there are trade-offs here. And what I haven't heard from the campaigners, and I absolutely have a lot of sympathy for them, is would they rather someone reduce their total outstanding debt? Would they rather someone reduce the monthly outgoing payments? Would they rather, as some people have said, we just as a country send far fewer people to higher education, which, by the way, would mean the middle classes would still be full, the universities would still be full of middle class people, but we wouldn't have all those free school meal kits and all the disadvantage expansion that has gone on in recent years, because middle classes will always win the race.
Yeah.
And these are trade-offs.
Nick,
and, it's good this discussion's happening, but
Nick,
they are trade-offs. They're not simple.
Nick, I'm really, really grateful for your time and a really good discussion. So really grateful to you this morning. Nick Hillman there, former special advisor to the ex-Universities Minister, Lord Willis.